He walked into court believing his money could buy justice, but walked out learning it couldn't even buy forgiveness. It was one of those mornings when the air in the courtroom feels thick, not with noise, but with expectation. You can almost sense when someone walks in believing the world owes them something. That morning, the door opened, and in walked Jason Wallace, a name that already carried weight outside those walls. He was young, mid-20s perhaps, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than the average family's monthly rent. His shoes shone like mirrors, and his confidence, or maybe arrogance, filled the room before he even spoke. He had that look some people get when they've never heard the word no in their lives. He strutted up to the bench, phone still in hand, half smirking, half bored. The courtroom clerk whispered his name to confirm the docket. Jason Wallace, she said softly. He said softly. I remember how he didn't even look up, just nodded as though this whole process was beneath him. I greeted him as I greet everyone, politely, with respect. Good morning, Mr. Wallace. He didn't answer right away. He was finishing a text. Then, without even glancing at me, he said, Yeah, morning. Let's get this over with. Now, I've dealt with every kind of person in that courtroom, from single mothers terrified about a parking ticket to veterans holding back tears as they explained why they missed a fine. But rarely had I seen someone treat the law like it was just another meeting on their schedule. I looked at him carefully and said, This isn't something we just get over with, Mr. Wallace. This is a courtroom, not a boardroom. He looked up then, finally meeting my eyes. Judge, I know how this goes. I pay the fine, you give your speech, and we move on. My dad's already spoken to someone about it. That sentence right there. My dad's already spoken to someone. It told me everything I needed to know. His father wasn't in the room, but his presence was. Henry Wallace, a man who had built his fortune in finance, known for his charm and his power. He was the kind of man whose shadow was long enough to hide a lifetime of mistakes. Jason was there because of reckless driving, clocked at nearly twice the speed limit through a residential zone. But to him, it was nothing more than an inconvenience, another item on his list of minor problems that money could fix. I asked, do you understand? He leaned on the table, adjusting his cufflinks, and said, Judge, with all due respect, no one was hurt. I was just late for a meeting. Let's just be reasonable. Reasonable. That word has many meanings depending on who's using it. To Jason, reasonable meant I'll pay my way out. To me, it meant understanding the consequences of your actions. I took a deep breath and said quietly, Mr. Wallace, this courtroom doesn't measure reason by money or influence. It measures it by conscience. He smiled, not the kind that hides fear, but the kind that mocks what it doesn't understand. Come on, Judge, don't make this dramatic. I've seen your videos. You like to play the moral card. For a second, the courtroom went silent. Even the clerks looked up. You could feel the tension shift. I looked at him, and I said calmly, You seem to mistake kindness for weakness, Mr. Wallace, but make no mistake. This courtroom isn't a stage for performance. It's a place where truth shows up, whether you're ready for or fine. He shrugged, pretending not to care, but I saw it, that flicker in his eyes. Beneath the bravado, there was something else, something smaller. Fear, maybe, or guilt. You see, arrogance is like perfume. You can smell it the moment it enters the room, but if you stay long enough, the sweetness fades, and what's left behind is just the scent of insecurity trying to disguise itself. So I asked him again, softly this time, but why were you speeding? He rolled his eyes. I told you, Judge, I was late. Late for what? A meeting, he said again, voice clipped. And what kind of meeting is worth risking someone's life over? That was when he hesitated. For the first time, his words didn't come easily. His lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came out. He just sighed and said, You wouldn't understand. Maybe he was right. Maybe I wouldn't understand what it's like to grow up in a house where everything has a price tag, where even love feels transactional. But what I do understand is this, no matter how high you build your walls, the truth always finds a way in. So I leaned forward, my voice steady, and said, Try me. For a brief moment, I saw something shift in him. It wasn't respect yet, but it was the first crack in the armor. The courtroom fell silent again. the hum of the air conditioner, the only sound between us. Outside, you could hear the faint honk of traffic. The world still moving, unaware that inside, a young man was facing the one thing money couldn't fix, himself. That day, Jason Wallace came in believing he owned the courtroom. But he was about to learn that the law doesn't bow to wealth. It stands equal before all. And as I looked at him, this polished, lost young man, I couldn't help but wonder. Would he finally see what his father's money had blinded him to his whole life? Or would he walk out the same way he came in? Untouched, unteachable, unbroken. I didn't know the answer yet, but I could feel it. This case wasn't about a speeding ticket anymore. It was about something much bigger. It was about a young man learning for the first time that respect cannot be bought. It must be earned. When Jason Wallace left the courtroom that morning, I thought that might be the end of it. A young man who needed a lesson and a judge who'd make sure he got it. But sometimes a case doesn't end when the gavel falls. Sometimes it continues in whispers, in phone calls, in the quiet corners where power likes to hide. That afternoon, as I was reviewing other cases, my clerk walked in and handed me a note. Judge, she said carefully, someone's requesting a private meeting. Says it's important. I asked who it was. She hesitated before saying the name, Henry Wallace. Now, I'd heard that name long before that day. Henry Wallace was a man who didn't just make money. He made influence. Owner of a large investment firm, political donor, board member at half a dozen organizations. The kind of man who could pick up a phone and make things happen. When someone like that asks for a meeting, it's never just a courtesy call. It's an attempt to bend the air before it reaches your ears. Still, I agreed. He came into chambers like he was walking into a negotiation. Impeccably dressed, calm, collected, with the same quiet confidence I'd seen in his son. Older, colder, more practiced. He smiled, but his eyes didn't. Your Honor, he began smoothly. I thank you for taking the time. I know you're a busy man. Well, yeah, I said evenly, but justice makes room for everyone, he chuckled. I like that. Justice making room. That's exactly why I wanted to speak with you. He placed an envelope on my desk. Not a large one, but heavy. The kind that doesn't contain words, just numbers. I didn't touch it. I didn't have to. I already knew what it was. Mr. Wallace, I said, before you say anything else, I want you to be very careful about the next words that come out of your mouth. He raised his palm slightly, pretending innocence. I think you misunderstand me. Judge, that's not a bribe. It's a donation for the community programs you support. The youth scholarships, the food drives. I've read about your work. This is just appreciation. That's what the powerful call it when they try to buy comfort with kindness. Appreciation, I repeated quietly. And this appreciation just happens to arrive on the same day your son appeared in my courtroom? He smiled faintly. I can see why people respect you, Judge. You don't miss much. I know, I said. And I don't sell much either. He leaned forward, his tone changing, less charming, more deliberate. Let me be direct. Jason is young. He made a mistake. But he's not a criminal. He doesn't deserve to have his reputation stained because of a few careless minutes. He has a bright future, a promising career ahead. I think you understand what I mean. I looked at him carefully. I understand perfectly. You want me to make your son's mistakes disappear. He exhaled. Disappear is a strong word. I'm asking for leniency. A quiet resolution. No media, no public record. In exchange, I'll ensure your community projects get all the funding they need. No questions asked. It's strange, the way silence can feel heavy. That moment stretched long enough for me to see him clearly, beyond the expensive suit and the polished voice. He wasn't just defending his son. He was protecting his own reflection, because Jason's arrogance didn't appear out of nowhere. It was inherited, cultivated, justified. I said softly, Mr. Wallace, you've spent your life buying things, but you can't buy integrity. Not mine, and not your son's. He frowned. I think you're misunderstanding the nature of what's at stake here. No, I said, I think you... He leaned back in the chair, assessing me. You're a good man, Judge. You've built a reputation on fairness, compassion, reason. I'm offering you the chance to continue that work. With the right support. Support. That's what he called it. I stood up slowly. Mr. Wallace, let me make something clear. You're not here to support justice. You're here to manipulate it, and if you think my compassion is a weakness to be exploited, You're mistaken. For the first time, he looked unsettled. Not angry, not defiant, just unsettled. The way men look when they realize their usual tools don't work. He tried again. Quiet or no? A judge. I'm just trying to protect my family. Then teach your son to take responsibility, I replied. That's how you protect him. Not by paying people to look the other way. There was a long pause. Then he picked up the envelope, smoothed it between his fingers, and said, I respect you, Your Honor, but one day you'll understand that power isn't about control. It's about knowing when to bend the rules. He stood up, nodded once, and walked out. After he left, I sat there for a while, looking at the empty chair where he'd been. You'd be surprised how often that seat has been filled by someone just like him. Someone who thinks justice is negotiable. But what they never understand is this. Justice doesn't bend. It may take its time, it may move quietly, but it always stands. And I knew then that this case was no longer about a traffic violation. It was about a family built on entitlement. A father who thought he could buy silence, and a son who believed silence meant innocence. What neither of them realized was that the louder they tried to suppress accountability, the more powerful truth became. When I walked into the courtroom the next morning, the air was different. Not tense, not calm, just waiting. It's something you learn after decades behind the bench. Silence has its own language. It can accuse, it can forgive, it can tremble with secrets. Jason Wallace was already there. No entourage this time, no lawyers whispering strategy in his ear. Just him. The expensive suit remained, but it fit differently now, like it belonged to someone else. His confidence had thinned, replaced by the restless energy of a man realizing the world doesn't rearrange itself to his comfort. I nodded to the bailiff. Bring him forward. Jason approached chin high, but his eyes darted as if searching for a familiar face to hide behind. There wasn't one. Mr. Wallace, I began, before we proceed, I have something to disclose for the record. He stiffened slightly, and I could almost hear the unspoken thought. What now? Yesterday, I said, her father visited my chambers. The words landed like a slow drop of ink in clear water, spreading, darkening, impossible to erase. A few reporters in the back leaned forward. Jason blinked, caught off guard. He made an offer. I continued evenly. A generous one, to ensure your case found a favorable outcome. I refused, of course, but I think you deserve to know how far silence can stretch when someone pays for it. Jason's mouth opened, then closed again. I saw the calculation behind his eyes. Not defiance this time, but disbelief. He did what? That paid for silence. I said softly. But just as he's done before, he shook his head slowly, voice breaking through a dry throat. I didn't ask him to. No, I said, but you benefited from it. And that's where the real deceit begins. Not with lies, but with the comfort of pretending not to see them. I leaned back, studying him. Do you remember the accident on Riverbend Avenue 2 years ago? Jason's brow furrowed. Of course I do. It wasn't serious? Not serious, I repeated. Hey, man died, Mr. Wallace. The words froze him mid-breath. The courtroom seemed to hold itself still as if even the air understood what truth had just entered it. That can't be right, he said. I was told he recovered. My father said, yes, I interrupted gently. Your father said? And you believed him because it was easier than facing what really happened. His face drained of color. I watched the denial rise and crumble in him like a wall that had protected him for years, but could no longer stand. I didn't know, he whispered. I swear, I didn't know, he whispered. And maybe not, I said quietly. But you never asked. You didn't want to know. He looked down, shaking his head, whispering something only he could hear. Maybe it was regret. Maybe it was the sound of old illusions breaking. And then I gestured to the bailiff. Bring them in. The doors opened and a woman entered, mid-40s, carrying a thin folder in the hand of a teenage girl who clung to her side. Their faces were steady, not vengeful, just tired. The kind of tired that comes from fighting a battle no one else knew existed. I looked at Jason. Do you recognize them? He glanced up, confusion clouding his eyes. No, I don't think so. You should, I said softly. This is Mrs. Clark and her daughter, Anna. 2 years ago, they were in the car you struck, the car you fled. The silence that followed was a kind of truth no gavel could command. Mrs. Clark's eyes glistened, but her voice didn't waver. You were the last person to see my husband alive, she said. You didn't stop. You didn't look back. And then, A week later, we were told the case was settled, that no one was to contact us again. Jason's hands trembled. I thought it was just property damage. Mrs. Clark stepped closer. Wait, was it property you broke? For a moment, even I struggled to breathe. Because justice, when it finally surfaces, doesn't roar, it whispers, and that whisper can tear through a man's soul. Jason covered his face with both hands. I didn't mean to, he said hoarsely. I didn't even know. I spoke gently but firmly. Ignorance, Mr. Wallace, is the luxury of those who never have to clean the mess they make. He looked at me then. Really looked. The arrogance was gone. In its place was something raw, almost human. Mrs. Clark's daughter stepped forward, her small voice cutting through the heavy air. Emmy Mom says people can change, she said. Is that true? Jason swallowed hard, his voice trembling. I hope so. I'm trying to believe it. Mrs. Clark placed the photo of her late husband on the edge of the bench. He was a teacher, she said softly. He used to tell his students that courage means stopping when it's hardest. I guess he kept driving. The words hit him harder than any sentence I could issue. Because guilt is a prison that builds itself, brick by brick, every time truth catches up to you. I said quietly, Mr. Wallace, this court isn't interested in vengeance, but we are interested in truth. For the first time in your life, you'll have to stand still and face it. He nodded, tears finally spilling, voice breaking apart. I can't fix it, he whispered. I know, I said. But you can stop pretending it never happened. Mrs. Clark turned to leave, pausing at the door. I don't want his money, she said. I just wanted him to remember my husband's name. After she left, I sat in silence, watching Jason struggle to steady his breath. His entire life had been built on denial, and now the foundation was cracking beneath him. The web of deceit that his father had spun, one settlement, one lie, one favor at a time, was unraveling, and the son, born into that silk, was finally feeling how sharp the threads could be when they snapped. When I adjourned the hearing, I said only one thing. Mr. Wallace, truth has been chasing you for a long time. Be grateful it finally caught up, because not everyone gets the chance to face it and live. He didn't respond. He just nodded, slow broken, but maybe beginning. And as I watched him leave, shoulders low, eyes unfocused, I knew this wasn't the end of his story. It was the moment it finally started to mean something. When the courtroom doors opened that morning, I knew the day wouldn't unfold quietly. The air felt charged, the kind of stillness that sits before a storm. Word had spread about the previous hearing. Reporters lingered outside, waiting for a spectacle. But I'd already told them, this isn't a performance, it's a reckoning. Jason Wallace sat at the same table, his hands clasped, eyes hollow from sleeplessness. His once perfect composure was gone, replaced by the pale unease of a man stripped of every illusion. He didn't look up when I entered. He didn't need to. He could already feel the gravity of what was coming. I gabbled once. Court is in session. Before I could speak further, the heavy doors opened again, and in walked Henry Wallace, his father. Two attorneys flanked him, carrying sleek briefcases and expressions of quiet entitlement. Henry's presence filled the room like perfume and poison at once. Elegant, commanding, suffocating. He didn't wait for permission to speak. Your Honor, he began smoothly, his voice trained for negotiations. I think this has gone far enough. My son has endured enough humiliation for what is, at worst, a lapse in judgment. Jason stiffened beside him, his face turning toward the sound of a voice that had defined his entire life. I remained silent for a long moment, watching father and son. One man accustomed to control, the other still learning what freedom might cost. Mr. Wallace, I said finally, your son hasn't endured humiliation. He's met honesty. There's a difference. Henry smiled tightly as though indulging a child. With all due respect, I'm not here for philosophy. I'm here to resolve this matter, quietly. Name your price. The entire courtroom stilled. Even the air seemed to hesitate. Jason turned toward his father, eyes wide with disbelief. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the bench. You think decency is a commodity, Mr. Wallace. It's not for sale. Not here. His smile hardened. You do realize who you're speaking to? Yes, I replied. A man who's forgotten he's human. The murmur that followed rippled through the courtroom like distant thunder. Henry's jaw flexed, but his control didn't crack. You think you can lecture me on morality? Judge, I build universities, hospitals, foundations, and yet, I interrupted softly, you failed to build the one thing that mattered, a son who knows the difference between right and wrong. For the first time, Henry faltered. The mask slipped, just a little. I saw the flicker of something like shame, or perhaps fear that the truth he had hidden for years was finally walking freely through the room. Jason stood suddenly, voice trembling but clear. Dad, stop! Henry turned sharply. Sit down. Oh, no, Jason said louder now. You can't fix this. Not this time. The courtroom froze. Even the stenographer's hands hovered above her keys. Jason's voice shook, but his words didn't. I've been fixing everything my whole life. Every mistake, every failure, every time I hurt someone. You cleaned it up, paid it off, buried it, and all it did was teach me how to run. He took a shaky breath. You didn't protect me. You broke me. Henry's face hardened, but his eyes flickered. The briefest flash of something vulnerable, something real. You think the world forgives weakness? Henry said sharply. You think these people care about you once you're broke? Jason's reply came low, trembling but steady. I don't care if they forgive me. I just don't want to be you. That silence, I'll never forget it. It wasn't the quiet of order. It was the quiet of truth finally landing after years of evasion. Henry's lips parted, but no words came. His son's defiance, not born of arrogance but of awakening, left him without a weapon to fight back. I didn't speak. Some lessons don't need a teacher to underline them. They simply unfold. Finally, Henry stepped back, smoothing his jacket as if adjusting dignity that had long since fallen out of fashion. This circus is over, he muttered. I'll be speaking to the district attorney. As he turned to leave, I said quietly, you built empires, Mr. Wallace. But today your son built something greater, a conscience. He didn't turn around. Men like him rarely do when faced with something they can't control. When the door closed behind him, the entire courtroom seemed to exhale. Jason stood still, his face pale but resolute. He looked at me, the tremor in his voice betraying both fear and relief. It feels like I lost everything, he said softly. I shook my head. And you didn't lose everything, Mr. Wallace. You lost a shield. That's not the same as losing your life. He let out a shaky laugh, half disbelief, half exhaustion. Then what happens now? I said. You finally begin to live honestly. I paused, letting the words settle like dust in sunlight. But for the first time, you stood against something larger than yourself, the shadow of a man who never allowed you to fall, and therefore never allowed you to rise. Today, you did both. He looked down, gripping the edge of the table. His hands no longer trembled. When he spoke, his voice was quieter but truer. I don't know what comes next. That's the beauty of accountability, I said. It doesn't promise comfort. It promises clarity. The gallery watched in silence, no longer seeing a spoiled air or a headline, but a man stripped bare. Raw, uncertain, but real. And that's when I realized something. Justice isn't about who leaves this room smiling. It's about who leaves it changed. I leaned forward once more. Forward once more. Wallace, I'm not finished with you. You will return tomorrow. The court will determine an appropriate sentence. Not one written in fines or community hours, but in truth. Because sometimes the hardest punishment is the one that asks you to rebuild what you destroyed. Not in others, but in yourself. He nodded slowly. I'll be here. And as the gavel struck, it didn't sound like an ending. It sounded like a beginning. The kind that takes root not in victory, but in surrender. A verdict had been rendered, yes, but not one that lived on paper. It lived inside a man who had finally learned that pride doesn't break when it's defeated. It breaks when it's seen for what it truly is. Fear wearing confidence as armor. And as Jason Wallace walked out that day, shoulders heavy but head no longer bowed in arrogance, I saw a glimmer of something the world rarely gives to men like him. A second chance that no amount of money could ever buy. There are verdicts that echo long after the gavel falls, not in sound but in silence. Jason Wallace's story was one of those. What happened in the courtroom that morning wasn't the end of a trial. It was the beginning of an awakening. When he left that day, I could see it in his walk. The stiffness of pride was gone, replaced by a weight far heavier than shame. I kept him close to the court's supervision for several months, not to punish him, but to guide him. Punishment without direction is cruelty. Redemption without responsibility is fantasy. Jason began his sentence not in a cell, but in a place far more uncomfortable for a man like him, a rehabilitation center for car crash victims. The same kind of center that helped people like Mrs. Clark and her daughter, the ones whose lives his negligence had scarred years ago. The first few days were difficult. I visited once, quietly, without my robe or the formality of court. I wanted to see what the young man was becoming without the armor of wealth. He didn't notice me at first. He was sitting beside a teenage boy in a wheelchair, holding a book. The boy's hands trembled as he tried to turn the page, and Jason waited patiently, his hand hovering, unsure whether to help or let the boy try again. That small hesitation, that restraint, told me more about his growth than any apology ever could. The old Jason would have reached out impulsively, just to feel useful, just to feel good about himself. But the new one had learned something deeper. That compassion isn't control, and help isn't about feeling powerful. Later that day, I spoke with the center's director. He doesn't talk much, she said, but he listens. Really listens. He's helping repair prosthetics now, taking the time to learn how each piece works. It's like he's rebuilding himself one screw at a time. Weeks passed, then months. The arrogance that once shadowed Jason's every word faded into a quiet humility that surprised even those who had written him off. He still drove, but now it was an old pickup truck. And when he parked, he looked twice before stepping out. A small act, but one steeped in awareness. One afternoon, Mrs. Clark came to visit the center. I hadn't planned it. She asked to see him. I was hesitant, worried about reopening old wounds, but she insisted. If he's truly changed, she said softly, I'll know. I stayed in the corner as she approached him. Jason froze when he saw her, his past standing before him, not in anger, but in quiet strength. I didn't come here for an apology, she said. I came because forgiveness is a two-way road. I can't walk mine if you haven't found yours. Jason's voice trembled. I still don't know how to forgive myself. She looked at him for a long moment, then placed a small worn photo in his hand, a picture of her husband and daughter. Now then start by remembering what you took, and make your life worthy of what you were given, another chance. I'll never forget the look on Jason's face. It wasn't sorrow anymore. It was gratitude, the kind that breaks a man open so something honest can finally take root. Months later, he came back to the courtroom, not as a defendant, but as a volunteer in our youth program, speaking to teenagers who had just received their first driving citations. I sat quietly at the back, watching him tell his story. He didn't dramatize it. He didn't cry. He just told the truth. He used to think I was untouchable, he said. That money could erase anything. But it can't erase the sound of someone crying because of what you did. It can't erase silence at a dinner table where someone should have been. The only thing that can erase that is the life you choose after. There wasn't a sound in that room. Even the ones pretending not to care leaned in, caught by something genuine. When he finished, I called him over. You've come a long way, Mr. Wallace, I said. He smiled faintly. I had a good judge. I shook my head. I know. You had a fair one. The rest was up to you. Before he left, he said something that stayed with me. I used to believe justice was something that happened to people. Now I know it's something that starts inside them. And he was right. Justice isn't a gavel striking wood. It's the moment a person decides to stop running from their reflection. Today, Jason works full-time at that same rehabilitation center. He doesn't use his family name anymore. The kids he helps see him not as the man who once broke lives, but as the man who now helps rebuild them. Sometimes, when I drive past that center, I see him through the window, laughing with those kids. A man who once thought he owned the world, now humbled by the privilege of serving it. And that's a lesson I hope everyone who watched this story remembers. Redemption isn't given by a court. It's earned, one choice at a time. When the noise of pride finally fades and the whisper of conscience begins to speak again. When I think back to that first day, the polished shoes, the confident smirk, the dismissive tone, I can hardly reconcile it with the man I see now. And perhaps that's the truest measure of justice, not punishment, but transformation. Because in the end, the law can correct your actions, but only humility can correct your soul.